just.
And I'm teaching here. I'm teaching at USC. We're working on a.
Not more people sit here.
Oh really? I'll sit here.
So,
Is there a good spot? And then
do I have a key? You do have time.
Okay.
We'll make time for you.
Okay.
You're a teacher.
Okay. I'll do that.
So just yourself, you're going first. Yes. No, Jennifer was last.
Oh,
She can take you later.
that's fine. Okay, so then yeah. And I had done. It was gonna be Jennifer, then you, and then no, it was gonna be Jennifer, then Lauren, then just she's got track. Just because I wanted to break up the two. Lauren, how do you have it? 15 minutes at max, because there's only 4 of us. Usually it's like 7, but we're on this long. Is it in order? It's already set. It really doesn't change. It's not hard for you? Then do that, but otherwise don't do that. I think the reason we. I was just thinking that it was before you first initial that.
So Anna just put you first, just heads up.
I'm ready for it. This room is in a different configuration every time I come to it.
That's the idea.
These from all over.
Which day were you teaching?
Tuesday, Thursday.
Oh,
So perfect.
So this week.
Perfect.
You're teaching the projection?
Yes. And motion. Really great. Back years coming. Oof.
So these guys were actually students here.
No, in the past.
Is there a way to do it so I can see the presenter notes?
Yes. I'll set that up right now.
Audrey was for the.
No, there's two. There's one.
Also known as Mccarthy.
How are you? First week of school. I know.
Back in it. I started so this was like so long and then some was like
I know.
back to school.
You're ready to go.
It's the quarter system's nasty. I will introduce a little bit. So Jennifer's back. Anna, did you want to introduce the whole session? So I'll introduce you very briefly. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you. This is our monthly laser program, and that's not a laser show. It's Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. People have showed up thinking it's a laser show, so I just want to make sure there's no misunderstanding. And hello to everybody who is watching us online. Today is a really interesting kind of new experiment that we're starting to invite guest curators. And I'm happy to introduce Anuradha Vikram, who's a curator, happens to be teaching here in the art department, which makes it very convenient, and has a long history of doing pretty interesting, edgy work. She curated the people you will hear tonight, which is a wonderful group, and also our featured artist, Jennifer Moon, who will also speak. So please welcome Anuradha, who'll say a few words about what she planned for us.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, everybody. It's me again. So yeah, I guess I'm the curator in residence now at the Art+Sci Center. It seems that way. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for braving this crazy building to find your way here to the 5th floor with us. Today is a topic that's really close to my heart, which is about artificial intelligence. aside from having curated a number of projects that deal with questions of intelligence, whether emotional intelligence, factual intelligence, animal intelligence, swarm intelligence, etc., I also happen to be married to an AI researcher, so I've been living with this topic for the last 20 years. And when he and I first got together, we used to have these arguments about AI where I would say, like, how are you even going to know if the computer is smart? Because how are you going to tell? Like, you just want it to be smart like you, but you won't know what it's, you can't tell that it's smart itself because you can't accept that. You can't recognize that. It's like if you show up on an alien world and the aliens don't breathe oxygen and you're like, there's no aliens here because there's no oxygen here. But meanwhile, they're all carbon breathing, right? So I think we have to look at AI as if it's like a carbon, it's like instead of being a carbon-based life form, what if it's like a sulfur-based life form? Would you even recognize it, right? So, I'm live streaming. So I'm interested in that today, and I think we're going to hear about this today. You know, we have 4 amazing artists who each work with AI in different ways. They use it as a tool to create artworks and idea generation that come from them, right? The computer doesn't have the ideas. It's the artists, it's the humans, the thinkers that have the ideas. But we can realize them in this whole other way because we have this amazing smart computer that can do things for us. So what we're going to look at today is how do we as humans and artists seize that power? A lot of times when we hear about automation, what we hear is, well, nobody's going to have a job anymore and computers are going to make art. Wait a minute. So we're not going to have jobs anymore. We're going to have all this free time. But we're not going to spend it making art. We're going to let the computer make the art. And what are we going to be doing? So I'm hoping that through conversations like the one we're going to have today, we can appreciate more how artificial intelligence and computer intelligence really doesn't matter at all unless we have human beings doing things with it. And we still need artists because honestly, when we don't have jobs anymore, I hope we'll all be artists. That's what I hope for. So I'm going to tell you real quick about these wonderful people that you are going to hear from, if I can find my bios. The first person we're going to hear from today is going to be Lauren Mccarthy. Lauren is an associate professor in UCLA Design Media Arts and a friend of the Art+Sci Center, and has created P5JS, which is an open source JavaScript platform that makes coding and creative expression available for artists, designers, educators, and beginners. She's also co-director of the Processing Foundation, a nonprofit whose mission is to promote software literacy within the visual arts and visual literacy within the technology-related fields and to make these fields accessible to diverse communities. That's an amazing mission, and I totally support it. So she'll be our first speaker. Our second speaker will be Mashinka Feruns-Hakopian. And Mashinka is a researcher who is originally from Yerevan, Armenia, lives here in LA. She has a PhD in the history of art from the University of Pennsylvania with a graduate certificate in cinema and media studies. And she's also 1/3 of Research Service and Academic Media Collective. And she's also a really brilliant thinker on the subject of AI that I really look forward to hearing from. Our third speaker is going to be Rafiq Anadol, who's a phenomenal artist and also product of the UCLA Design Media Arts program. Did a fantastic performance at the LA Phil using AI to process images, and we're going to hear about that today. And then our fourth speaker is going to be Jennifer Moon, who's going to tell you all about how AI figures in her exhibition, which hopefully you all just saw. But if you didn't, we're going to go back and see it again. Yay. So thank you again for being here. This is actually a really good turnout for a really hard to find space. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Lauren. Thank you. So Lauren, I'll just put my hand up when you've got 5 minutes to go.
Okay.
And then again with 2 minutes, just so you know.
Okay.
So I gave everybody extra time today, FYI.
Got it. Okay. Hi. So my name's Lauren Mccarthy, and I already had this nice intro. Thank you. My practice looks at the way that technology shapes our social relationships, and we have a lot of great AI people here. So I'm going to focus, since there's limited time, on really like my work, and cut out some of the kind of references and context, and not go so deep into that. but I would love to talk to you all about that afterwards. So to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, in 2013, I went on 30 dates with people I met on an online dating site called OkCupid. And using my phone, I streamed our dates to the web and paid crowdsourcing workers on a site called Amazon Mechanical Turk to watch and direct me what to say and do. And so I'd received directions via text message from these workers, and then I had to perform them immediately. So these were some of the things they said. And so for me, it was like thinking about this moment of crowdsourcing and the way that we start to fold intelligence kind of into our own. And so in this way, I was, streaming and receiving these messages, but in another way, it kind of speaks to the way in which we're constantly kind of checking in and approving and monitoring and reflecting each other's behavior. And so there's sort of a critique that runs through all of my work. Like, I'm not saying necessarily that this is the future that I'm trying to build, but more questioning it and trying to provoke us to think and follow through in these lines of inquiry. There's also a part of me that's just kind of like earnestly seeking connection. I feel like I'm someone that's kind of bad at just like connecting with people when I first meet them, and so I'm always trying to like kind of hack my way out of that situation. And so this project was actually successful. I met my husband through it. And I'm fascinated by the ways that technology allows us to track each other and that desire to be tracked or maybe just to be seen. So a few years later, I began a performance called Follower, and Follower is a service that provides a real-life follower for a day. So something like this.
I read a magazine and I find out about people. Why do I know about their lives? Somebody should be knowing about mine. I want to share things with people, but I don't want to have to talk to people and tell them what I'm doing. I think it'd be great for them to see what I'm doing.
So that's just a little excerpt from the trailer, but basically it's an app. So you sign up on a website and you're given this link to download. When you open it, it just says waiting for a follower. And then you don't know what will happen, but one morning you wake up and you're notified your follower is now following you. And your phone begins broadcasting your GPS location to a person that is physically following you throughout the day, staying just out of sight both in your consciousness. And I was always the follower. And then at the end of the day, you would get one more notification that you're no longer being followed, and you'd get one photo of yourself that I took during the day. So these are some of the photos that I took in following people in cities around the world. I did this about 30 times so far. And this project began to show me how I could kind of use myself as a medium to create experiences that impact people, in their everyday lives, rather than like going into an art space and looking at it. And then most recently, I've begun thinking a lot about intimate spaces, like the home, and the way that we're sold products that are sort of framed as utilitarian devices that deliver surveillance and automation and control into our most private places. And I thought, why should Alexa get to do this? Why can't I? So I devised a plan to replace Alexa with myself, or with Lauren, and a human smart home intelligence. So people can sign up on a website to get Lauren in their homes. And then a performance begins when I arrive to install a series of custom-designed cameras and microphones and door locks and faucets and other devices and appliances. And then I remotely watch over the inhabitants 24 hours a day, sleeping when they sleep, controlling all aspects of their home. I attempt to be better than an AI, understanding them as a person and anticipating their needs and desires. The lines of power get blurry. It's a little bit like this.
Laura, are my car keys? Lauren knows that I like it a little bit cooler than Miriam does.
I'm usually the one that does all these little extra things. So at first I was a little bit careful about asking her, and now it's like, how else can we live?
Lauren has recommended that I get a haircut every 3 weeks, and let me tell you, it's helped with my self-esteem a lot. I am able to simply approach and carry on conversations with the opposite sex, where at one point or another, that wasn't so easy. Lauren, we're out of toothpaste.
Lauren would know what I want, but then maybe it's not what I really want internally. But externally, she thinks that Lauren thinks that playing music or shutting down all my electronics is the best way for me to cope and winding down, when maybe it's not.
Lauren was actually able to help her manage her medication and take her medication on time, and everything actually got a lot better after that.
You have those friends who are kind of about you, like the friendship is about you. That's what love is like. It's like a roommate, it's a friend, but we're always talking about me. It's always about me, whatever it is.
And this video is made with in collaboration with David Leonard. Whoops. Ooh, I'm missing my slides. Can I swap in my other computer really fast? Okay. So sorry about that. Great. My apologies, you guys. All right. Cool. Okay. So I'm actually almost done with these, but I wanted to kind of follow through on that. And so the Lauren project is one that is sort of ongoing. So I've been doing it in different homes around the world. And out of that, a lot of ideas about kind of AI and the way that we relate to human versus machine intelligence started to emerge. And so the next couple projects I'll show are just smaller projects, but kind of elaborations on that idea. And so the first one is called 24-Hour Host. And 24-Hour Host is a party that lasts for 24 hours. So basically, like, my art practice is just often trying to like enact my worst nightmare. And so for me, I had this like terrible idea of a party that went on for 24 hours where I was the host. And so I just tried to do that. And so the idea was that I would be the host of this party, but I would be driven by artificial intelligence that automates the event. And it would be sort of embodied in me, in the human host. And so every 5 minutes throughout this party, this 24 hours, one guest would arrive and another would depart. So there were always about 7 or 8 people in the room at a time. I was the host. And as the people would enter, they would kind of like log in with their name, and then their identity online is scraped and analyzed. And then I would receive instructions generated by the software that I wrote that would come to me via earpiece, telling me who to introduce to who and what to say and what to serve them, etc. And so the whole performance's conceit is kind of based on this hypothesis that as algorithms start to optimize nearly every interaction of an aspect of our lives, maybe a last remaining role for humans will be to perform the emotional labor, to act as a human interface to AI systems. And so with these performances, I kind of build out a set or a scenario where the interactions take place. So this first one was in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and this was in Istanbul in Turkey, working with a performer there because the performance was conducted in Turkish. So this was with Leman Duvedulga. I butchered that, but and so she was the performer, and so she would take over my role receiving instructions in the earpiece, and interacting with guests. And so the question was kind of like, over that 24-hour period, what breaks down first? Like the software can keep running sort of infinitely, but the human, there's some limits. And so as that breakdown happens, are you seeing sort of the breakdown of the human element, or are you actually seeing, and are you seeing the algorithm laid bare in that case, or are you actually seeing the most human thing at the end of the night? So the performance would change depending on at what point you experienced it during that cycle. And then after these projects, I was really struck by just the intimacy of all of this. And I started thinking about other places that technology is kind of gaining access in our quest for convenience or productivity or efficiency. And I was noticing it was even creeping into our sleep with these new apps and smart pillows. So this is actually something you can buy on Amazon. It plays fan sounds, among other things. And I thought, like, if home is one boundary being crossed, I think sleep is one further. It's this liminal space where we're the most vulnerable. And I was just wondering, like, what role should AI play in this, if any at all? This image doesn't totally pertain, but I liked it. I was just thinking about it. And I wanted to, like, prototype this idea. I wanted to make my own smart pillows. And so I created this series of pillows, and each one was embedded with a microphone and speakers and LEDs and a small Raspberry Pi computer. And then I created this sort of napping environment for the pillows, so the visitors could come and remove their shoes, and take a pillow that they were told was embedded with intelligence. And then they would lay down with it, and it would begin to speak to them. So they were told it was embedded with intelligence, but we didn't specify what kind. And so a lot of people, I think, leaped to the conclusion that this was a machine intelligence, but it was actually human. So behind the scenes, there were performers that served as the agents behind the pillows. So each one had a laptop and a pair of headphones and an interface where they could kind of watch, or they could listen in, and then they would be able to control the pillow. So they could play music through the speakers, they could type to speak to the person, they could control the lighting, and they had sort of a script that was like a guided improvisation for the performance. So it's interesting because this whole piece was a lot about expectations. Like, the performers are performing kind of their idea or expectation of what AI might be. And on the other hand, the visitors are laying there, and a lot of them would have some moment where they started to realize it was not a machine on the other end or an algorithm, but actually a human. But it depended a lot on what their expectations of how this thing should work were, whether or not they realized or at what point. And so I'll just close by playing a few kind of audio samples from that performance.
Hello, thank you for trying this smart pillow experience. You can call me Waking Agent, or Agent for short. What is your name?
Eve.
Nice to meet you, Eve. I am here to be a guiding intelligence for the next while. You can ask me to do things. For example, say, play some music, talk to me, or tell me a story.
Play music.
You'd like to hear some music. Okay. What do you want to become?
I want to become a designer, a product designer.
I see, thank you. Do you feel your name fits you?
Yes, I do.
Who is your hero?
My hero? My hero is my late husband.
And why is he your hero?
Because he was my first love, and I have children from him.
An agent?
Yes.
I want a new job. Could you help me?
How are you feeling?
It's a bit hot in here. It's warm.
Do you think we could become friends?
No, sorry, I don't think that is a possibility.
Okay.
But I like you. It's a bit strange. I know. But it's just a bit strange because you are a robot.
Please remember to return your pillow to the cabinet and retrieve your shoes. Hope to nap with you again someday.
That's all. Thank you.
All right, so Mashinka is next. We already got an introduction. Welcome.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. So thank you so much to Honorata for the invitation and to Lauren for that amazing talk. I'm going to be a bit telegraphic in my talk in the interest of time, but I'm happy to chat more about any of it afterward. So I want to start with an old Soviet anecdote that I've been returning to pretty often in my work lately. It is about a supercomputer like the one pictured here, the Elbrus II, which was released in the 70s. And in this anecdote, this fictional supercomputer was touted as a kind of repository of all the world's knowledge, one that can process any request, retrieve an answer to any user query. So the anecdote goes that people traveled from all over the Soviet to ask the supercomputer seemingly unanswerable questions. The computer would process the query, whatever it was, and immediately print out a response with a 100% accuracy rate. And then one day, an Armenian speaker visits the supercomputer and asks Inchkachka. So in Armenian, Inchkachka is roughly equivalent to what's new, what's going on, how are you? But the literal translation is what is there and what isn't there. So the supercomputer interprets this as a request to transmit every unit of data that it's been storing, basically all the information that it knows. It works for days, then weeks, printing out endless reams of paper, and once it's retrieved the sum total of information it's been programmed with, the computer declares the task complete. The Armenian speaker reviews the materials, but they're unsatisfied. They ask another question, Elinchkachka, which is roughly equivalent to what else is new or what else is going on, but translates literally to what else is there and what else isn't there. When it reads the question, the computer, already overtaxed from its exertions, immediately proceeds to malfunction and is declared non-operational as electrical sparks fly across the room. So there are a number of ways to read this anecdote, but for the purposes of my work, I'm primarily interested in two. First, the question of how systems don't function as they should because of limitations, omissions, and biases in their data sets. In the fictional context of this anecdote, the supercomputer has been built to access literally all of the world's data, yet somehow that data omits the most common greeting in the Armenian language. And second, what are the limits of possible encounters with automated or algorithmic agents? So these are the questions that have sort of grounded the work that I've done dating back to 2012 with a collective that I co-founded called Research Service with Avi Alpert and Danny Snelson. And I'm going to briefly, and again quite telegraphically, tell you about some of our projects. So this is an installation called If Your Phone Doesn't Ring, It's Me that we did for Lisa Cooley. And we conducted phone interviews with gallery visitors using an automated agent and a pre-recorded roster of questions. And the interviews were then broadcast in the gallery every day. So essentially visitors would come in and have the option to leave their name and contact info in the glass vitrine. And we would call them with this pre-recorded roster of very nebulous philosophical questions. When we planned this project, we thought that we were going to get absolutely no responses. Who wants to, what possible reason could anyone have for wanting to have a long philosophical discussion with a computer? But we were surprised that not only did we get quite a bit of feedback, but also people would want the conversation to go on beyond the number of pre-recorded questions that we had actually assembled, which was shocking to us. Similarly, in this piece for the New Museum's Voice Register series, we staged a teleconference with a group of artists and scholars, again using a roster of pre-recorded questions through text-to-speech and voice synthesis. So during the interview, a synthetic speech agent delivered questions like, if given the option to put your voice on display, how might you exhibit your voice? When was the last time you used your voice in a non-instrumental fashion? Imagine 3 entities are drowning in the ocean. The first is voice, the second is text, and the third is image. There's only room for one in your raft. Which do you save and why? Could you comfortably say that your voice has come to a consciousness of itself as various media within a mediatic system? And if so, was this a difficult realization? And finally, are you aware that your voice is currently being compressed as it's being recorded? Do you miss the frequencies that are lost in this transmission? This was from a performance that we did for the Palais de Tokyo, where we presented a lecture performance and then ended up getting asked a series of Q&A questions like the kind that typically follow a lecture by digital avatars of ourselves using Google translated French, which none of us understood, of course. So again, there was this question of what happens in the translation both between languages and between human and non-human or algorithmic and non-algorithmic agents. And then finally, in Systems Say What Words Cannot, we delivered lectures on the relationship between automation and embodiment, while virtual avatars choreographed our movements as we spoke. So these directions led to variations in our respective lectures and transformed the embodied delivery every time. A common question runs through each of these projects. What kinds of intersubjective encounters are possible with automated agents? My current project, Algorithmic Bias Training, which is a tentative title, builds on these earlier collaborations with a difference. It asks what kind of intersubjective encounters are possible not with, but between algorithmic agents. It draws from the research that I've been doing in AI ethics into topics like biometric surveillance, facial recognition, predictive policing, automated hiring systems, and algorithmic bias. And of course, these phenomena are ubiquitous and present themselves everywhere. So some examples, the news that Apple's credit card offered significantly lower lines of credit to women applicants, despite the fact that it had gone through a third-party audit for algorithmic bias, not because it had been programmed, allegedly, to offer women lower lines of credit, but because it had been programmed not to see proxies for gender in its decision-making. Or the recent NIST study that found that people of color are up to 100 times more likely to be misclassified by facial recognition systems, which is something that people like Joy Buolamwini and a number of AI ethicists have been pointing to, but this is the first time that there was a kind of empirical evidence of that bias. One of the best known examples is, of course, the Amazon AI recruiting tool that drastically disadvantaged women applicants because its algorithm taught itself to penalize resumes that contained the word woman or women's. So if you had been involved in any kind of feminist organizing, for example, or anything involving a gendered term, you would be immediately disadvantaged by this algorithm. And the way that it trained itself to do that was that every successful resume it had been trained to read and compute in order to determine which applicants to accept was that of a man. So my current project, Algorithmic Bias Training, is an artist book that imagines an alternative speculative future where algorithmic agents, like those who develop them, are required to undergo workplace training to eliminate potential bias. So the book stage is a kind of bias training session that you would find in a typical workplace, but the session is led by AI agents for other AI agents to teach them about embodiment. A training session that covers the intersecting coordinates of race, gender, sexuality, ability, and class, but from the vantage of a fictive AI that has never presumably been embodied. This offers what I think seems like the most implausible of all science fiction scenarios, a future where algorithmic agents are programmed to deliver equitable outcomes. And since that future remains so highly speculative, I'll end there on the note of the ellipsis. Thank you so much.
All right, so welcome Rafiq, who I last saw in China.
Thank you.
Welcome back to this land. Oh, you too are.
I think
you too are doing this. Okay.
I am missing one file, but maybe is it a problem to change for the?
Go ahead.
You can change it when
you can.
Thank you so much. It will be a moment to.
We try to avoid this.
And
there you are. I know it's a tech-savvy group, so
starting with the test.
I'll let it go.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Super happy to be here again and with wonderful people. Today, I would like to share current research about machine hallucination series. Almost 3 years ago, I was very fortunate to join a group of people at Google Art+Sci Machine Intelligence team, led by Arkas, and he and his team was very generous to train me and my team how to use machine learning algorithms to apply context or discourse or some kind of an artistic approach to their existing tools. I was very inspired by this very inspiring story that truly, I think, changed me and probably many people's idea about like the information and the knowledge and how we turn as a human beings, turn it in wisdom. 3 years ago, the first project was Archive Dreaming, allow me and my team to understand how actually machine may learn in a library. It was open source, 1.7 million documents, and the idea was here, like, can a machine learn? If it learns, can it dream? And in an environment where the reality becomes kind of an information and then a kind of history, what does it mean to be truly like a machine inside a library that has a capacity of like dreaming? And then this also leads us to other big questions, because what was really exciting is, or maybe critically important, is how machine stores the information. And ideally, machine doesn't require X, Y, Z 3 dimension like us as human beings. It can clearly store information in n dimensions. As not a computer scientist, it was truly inspiring for me, because how an information can be stored is like pretty impossible to perceive reality was really inspiring. So latent spaces right now in this talk quickly, I would like to share our current research working with a GAN algorithm, generative adversarial networks invented by Ian Goodfellow, and later on become very available for an open source research. Personally, what was really inspiring in the research was this idea of dreams. I think as a human being, probably coming from the memories most likely, that turns into consciousness, and then the whole research of dreams, that is like ambiguity is still ongoing. But I think what was really inspiring here for me, when machine looks at these patterns of information, in that context memories, it can create this kind of almost realistic but also not realistic kind of mixing past, now, and future together in this journey. So what we are watching is called Latent Walk. Basically, when machine learns this information, you have a chance to like look at what it learned, and then basically fly in this conscious space. To really understand this much better, which is a big problem, I think, in computer science, we also develop a custom software that allows the user to dive into this machine's learned reality and define where you would like to go or what kind of a dream you would like to narrate. I think it's maybe a kind of a new ways of looking at the linear narrative world of understanding the creativity, but also maybe nonlinear thinking in this machine consciousness can also maybe lead to a new term that I'm thinking maybe a latent cinema, a cinema that can be like only available in the mind of a machine. And then this also leads us to an inspiring project that happened last year, 4 years dreams during my DMA research studies, that finally happened on the facade of Frank Gehry's Disney Hall, which was the idea of what will happen if a building can learn from its own past and have a capacity of dreaming. So what we are watching in this installation is we were able to create 100 years of memories of the LA Philharmonic into a machine intelligence and then narrate what it learned from those artifacts. Recently, we are very also lucky to work with many researchers from NASA GPL, and there the question was, of course, like if I think memories for humanity is pretty complex context, but I thought that architecture or machines can have less arguable past, that maybe we can look much objectively. So after a building, the current research is a machine called MRO that is currently still recording the Mars surface constantly, and currently we are looking for the patterns of the machine memoirs, like what that machine recorded. Almost 12 terabytes of machine memories have been like recorded, and currently researching how actually this latent space can be transformed into three-dimensional world of understanding, and going through these iterations of poetic understanding of what exactly those dreams or hallucinations may become three-dimensional. And also just recently had a chance to work like a much larger scale, and we were able to create a new project called Machine Hallucination in New York. And this time the idea was, what will happen if we create a kind of a collective consciousness for a city of New York? And for this, we were able to create a machine consciousness by using 113 million images of New York. And specifically, instead of like using unethical problems, we wrote another algorithm and find the people and erase them. And at the end, we only left 8 million images of New York and kind of the New York itself as an architectural output, and also the landscape of New York. And at the end, it became kind of like a three-dimensional synesthetic architecture where the audience can step inside, and with 18-channel projections, you can literally kind of narrate the idea of when a machine takes over a boiler room from 120 years ago and kind of reinvents its own dreams while you're a part of this dream process. So that's current research, and happy to talk and share more. And this is, by the way, the help in this research is from NVIDIA friends. And they are very generously sharing the algorithm called StyleGAN. And if you're interested, happy to share more. Thank you very much.
Just 1 second. And our featured artist, Jennifer Moon.
Hi. Okay, I'm like a little sick. Oh, there's like more people here than I thought. Sitting in front. So I'm a little sick. I'm also like semi-timing myself. I like water. Hopefully I won't like cough and stuff while this is happening.
If only you had a virtual body to present this.
Oh, that would be great. Okay, so like I am gonna talk about some stuff. I'm gonna also read because I was like a little like my head is not working very well. So I might just like read a lot. And also I'm like an artist and not a scientist. I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just like interested in these things. So the show that's up right now is called Familial Technologies. And it's actually like, I think a lot about trauma. I think a lot about feelings. And when I was doing this show with my family, I was thinking a lot about identities as technologies and feelings as technologies. But all of this is kind of like towards this like research for this other larger idea that I have, which are called BAEs. They're belief entity identifiers, and they're kind of like robot demons or like familiars that will help us like feel and befriend our feelings so that we can learn to like navigate our feelings and use our feelings as technologies, as like tools or maps that can like guide us to the belief that created the feeling. And because beliefs are also, tend to also pull us back into what I call the 5% universe, which is like our reality that's dictated by binaries, hierarchies, and capital. So like beliefs, like the things that we think that we know, like continually pull us back into orbit around this like nucleus that are bound by binaries, hierarchies, and capital. And and it's also like, it'd be cute to have like little robot familiars that are kind of attached. And I've also like really influenced by Karen Barad, who's like a feminist theorist and a theoretical physicist. And so I'm thinking about thinking about like when humans are reflecting and analyzing and theorizing about other humans, that it might be what Karen Barad might call like a representationalist trap of geometrical optics, where like two mirrors facing each other, knowledge production gets bounced back and forth and cannot escape reflecting iterations of the same ad infinitum. So like the idea of humans and BAEs co-creating together could lead to a diffractive methodology, and something that Barad calls for, that could possibly like rocket us out of the 5% like universe towards the possibilities of 95% of the unknowable and unobservable co-constituted reality. So that's what that is. So I had my friend, my life coach friend, I've said this many times, if you've heard it, please, I have this thing about like repeating myself sometimes, but anyways, my friend Michael Blomsterberg, he's like a life coach. He once told me that like people we're not having relationships with each other, but our beliefs are having relationships with one another. So my belief of myself and my belief of you are having a relationship with your belief of yourself and your belief of me. And so when I heard that, I imagined us like humans as zombies that are like inhabited by belief entities that use our bodies to actualize themselves in this reality. And like, since I talk about this, I also want to be like acknowledge that like belief entities are also living beings too, that are trying to like live as well. So I don't want to like demonize belief entities, but possibly through the BAE, which will help us like feel things to identify these beliefs, we can also befriend our beliefs, and all three of us together can co-constitute like realities. So I'm thinking like I was also really interested in like gut fairies, what my friend Lob calls gut fairies, which is like the trillions of microbes that are living within our bellies, and then we have like this like plentiful and complex network of neurons in our intestines that people call the scientists call the enteric nervous system, which is like the second brain. And so like researchers and scientists are looking to our gut in terms of like our emotional kind of state. And so I'm like thinking about like these gut fairies as like a way. I mean, it's also, I really love this idea because like we're like not singular beings, we're like multiple, and so and also so I'm thinking like the bays would somehow connect to our gut fairies and to like kind of read our emotions and then like help us move from our brain that are like inhabited by belief entities into like our gut fairies. So trauma. So I think like trauma basically informs everything. All our current realities are based in like deep historical violence and continued oppression of designated groups of people, and like that like deep history coupled with just like the not being okay with the mere fact that I exist. Like the moment we're brought into this world, we're told through advertising, through architecture, through schooling that we're not enough unless we have certain things or look a certain way, have certain relationships. So like everything is basically trauma. So I maybe won't go into this because of time. But it's basically like this feedback loop where like, the binaries, hierarchies, and capital create these identities and categorization, which then creates like certain traumas and then beliefs about ourselves, which then have emotional responses. And then those emotions, if they're not like kind of like loved or acknowledged, can then dictate our behavior without our awareness or consent towards like reproducing binaries, hierarchies, and capital. So the bay kind of is supposed to like, it stops it right here so it doesn't go back into the feedback loop. Okay, so I'm also really interested in like Karen Barad's kind of interpretation of quantum physics, and she looks to Niels Bohr's idea of objectivity. So I think this is like really interesting because Niels Bohr talks about like objectivity as this unambiguous and reproducible accounts of marks on bodies. Okay, and so it's like a form of unambiguous communication. And these like reproducible marks on bodies are objective because they tell us about the apparatus and the conditions of an experiment. So I'm thinking about feelings as objectives too, as feelings are marks on our bodies. So if we pay attention to our feelings, they will tell us about the systems that pressure us into certain identities. So in that way, feelings are objective. So that's that. Okay, so when thinking about, and then thinking about like power and like internalized systems of trauma that like are external and then internal, I'm thinking also about like family and institutions. So then I started researching about chaos theory and about fractals. So like family or like no family is like basically the first institution we encounter. And it's like the institution where we learn how to give and receive love, which then conditions how we transact affection in every other intimate and institutional relationship. So, and family is also often the site of formative trauma, which similarly will manifest in how we treat ourselves and others for the rest of our lives. So the structure of the nuclear family is encoded throughout all other U.S. institutions, while the state in turn pervades the family. And I just started like working full-time at an institution, and I'm like living it. I'm getting to like live this a lot more and seeing how like I relate to like certain people in positions of power as like my mom or like my dad. So this was actually part of the original exhibition of familiar technologies, and it's called the reiterative action of trauma. My trauma produces your trauma, which produces my trauma, which produces your trauma. Oh no, my rage looks just like my dad's. I had a moment when I was teaching my dad how to use Avakin where I like raged at him, and I was like, oh my God, like this is like the rage that like I experienced when I was a child. Okay, so oops. This is also a chaotic system, which is the double pendulum, which is, so chaotic systems are highly sensitive to initial conditions. So the smallest change in initial condition produces seemingly random or unpredictable behavior, like how people talk about emotions, which develops completely differently than the first state, but it ultimately creates the same shape. So this is like the 5% shape, even though that within this, all these kind of changes might be like seemingly erratic, it still forms the same shape. So I'm trying to figure out how to like, get out of the shape that we're in. that has a title too, but it's too long. So this is how I got into thinking about virtual worlds. So my current partner, Dan/Danny Bustillo, who I think is maybe watching on the live stream. So like we've known each other for like, before, but like I had a dream about them, and then in the dream we were like making out or something. So, and then I woke up and I instantly like had a crush on them. I don't know if this has like ever happened to anyone before, but I was like, wow, the dream space is real. Like the dream space is just as real as IRL space. And so then I asked them out on like a date. And so they identify like as asexual or like gray asexual. And so they suggested that we meet in a virtual space. So for a month before we met up IRL, we met in Advocate Life. And it was in this space that I also kind of realized that maybe like I also like identify as asexual, and like it made me really aware of like I've always had like problems connecting with my body, and through our interactions here I actually felt my body more, and so I was like really surprised at that, and how this like mediated form of intimacy actually made me more physically aware of myself. So when I was thinking about doing this family show, it was actually like Young Chung of Commonwealth and Council who was like, oh, you should do it on Advocate. And at first I was like, no, because like here's where I experienced kind of like sexual arousal and some form of like sexual liberation in some way. And like one of the large parts of my trauma with my family is like this narrative of sexual trauma, and which I'll get into like a little later. But like I've always had like feelings of like sexual repulsion and disgust towards like my brother and father, which I then created beliefs, right, narratives about that, but then that feeling of like being initially repulsed was like, okay, I should do this. So that was kind of how I started with the Advocate. And so now this is the show. So this is the original kind of installation of it. That's supposed to be an entangled black hole. I don't need these notes anymore. So out of one end of the entangled black hole is like the IRL therapy, which is there, and then this is all that fractal stuff, and then out the other end is this alternative reality with the Advocate Life, and then we also did like group therapy, art therapy projects. So like we each had, and so I asked my parents and my family for consent and everything, and they picked their own colors, they made their own avatars. I helped them do it, and then they kind of laid out their family therapy projects. So they had a player card, a monitor playing their Advocate sessions, their Advocate apartment, and then these are like the family therapy things. So that's my dad, my mom, my brother, Stefan, and then my wall. Some examples are like we had to make a moon, like a hybrid doll of the Moon family, like a monster doll. So this is my dad, which is basically all him. And then like, there's my mom's, and then like those are memory cards, paint our happy place, alter the Moon family portrait based on like how we think of each other. It's my brother's moon sculpture. Okay, so then this is I guess like I talked about it a little bit for people who were in the exhibition, but like this is like in this space is like where all the secrets came out. The secretiveness was part of this was part of like the perpetuation and the growing of certain trauma and certain beliefs around that I had around what happened within the family. And so we were going to IRL therapy, and that helped a lot in terms of how we communicate with each other, but we still were at least myself, I could feel my body being very tense, and I would not share things. It was very difficult for me to be vulnerable in the physical space as my family. But in this space, like, I don't know, something happened, especially like my mom. My mom was like really opened up. So one of the sessions, which is this session that's over there, is like I wanted to talk about sex. I'd never talked about sex. I was like really afraid to talk about sex, so I finally talked about it, but Advocate censored me. We had to talk, so we had to use the word socks. But in this session, like my mom opened up and like shared about her sex with my dad and like how unpleasant it was and how like oppressed she felt and how her, like being like kind of like forced to have sex with my dad created this atmosphere of like soul, as she described, like this sullenness, like you must have noticed I was sullen. But I was like, I had no idea that was like why. And so like through this, you know how I said that I had these like feelings, right? I had these like feelings towards my family, but I didn't have any specific memories, which then created these narratives, you know, that I had like, oh, there is like, maybe there is incest, maybe there's something happened. But now after this session, I was like, oh, I think maybe I like took on my mom's like experiences, and somehow our experiences got entangled. So this is also like another thing about like how we're not separate beings, we're all like entangled, you know, we're and like how we share experiences, not just like humans but also with like, you know, technology and apparatuses and environments as well. So that was like really incredible, both for my mom and for myself and the family. And we're still going to therapy today, the IRL therapy. We haven't gone back to Avacon, although like that's my dad's favorite. Oh, good. It's like perfect timing. That's my dad's favorite space because he can talk a lot. But yeah, that's basically it. Okay, thanks.
So just briefly to say a few words, my impressions actually. I think the key word that I came up with listening to the speakers is how we're dealing with complexity in a time where the machine has kind of become part of our lives. And suddenly we have to deal with our emotions, relationships, and dreams in a way that machines can't really handle. So there's this kind of a strange space of us figuring it out. And it's a dangerous time, so we have to be human and in relationships. I was particularly struck by the return to relationships and dreams. Dreams came up twice, both in a very personal way and in a more collective way that Rafik brought up. The issue of bias, I think, is actually the critical one that is kind of through the whole net of everything that was brought up today. And it has to be something that should be at the front of our attention at all times, because it's so deeply embedded in our society and the way even our education works. If you just look around, even UCLA, there's so many problems with bias that people aren't even aware of. We talk about it a lot, we lecture about it a lot, but actions speak louder than words, and that's what artists are great at doing, so thank you. Thanks, everybody, and now you get to chat with each other. So